Have you ever struggled to capture the magic of fireworks in a photo? Well, today I've got some tips for you on how to photograph fireworks with the Nikon Z8. The Z8 is a powerhouse when it comes to capturing photos of fireworks. Its advanced features make it the perfect tool for this type of photography. Blurry photos and overexposed shots are typical challenges when shooting these bright, dynamic, and fast-moving objects. But by combining the Z8 with the proper accessories, utilizing its built-in features, and having the correct camera settings, you'll be able to take incredible fireworks photos. Be sure to stick around to the end for a bonus tip that'll make sure that you get the photos you want while also getting to enjoy the fireworks show. To ensure that you don't get blurry photos, there's one key piece of equipment that you want to make sure that you bring with you to the fireworks show. This piece of equipment is a tripod. There's multiple reasons why you're going to want a tripod for this photography. The first being that it's going to make sure that your camera stays still whenever you take your longer exposures in order to make sure you get great photos of the fireworks. Additionally, this provides an advantage because you're not having to hold your camera the entire time. What you can do is you can go get to the event early, get your tripod set up, get your camera set up, and you're ready to start firing whenever the fireworks begin. And you don't have to sit there and hide behind your viewfinder the entire time. And the final reason you're going to want a tripod is you can do some really cool editing techniques when you get back home because the camera has it moved, and by using the light and blend mode in Photoshop, you can actually combine some of your fireworks photos together to actually have more fireworks in one photo than what you actually captured. So now that you know a key piece of equipment that you're going to need for the photos, what about the features that the Z8 has that's going to help you take your photos? So the first one that you want to go check in your settings is make sure that you're in RAW mode. This is because you want to make sure you have a lossless and unprocessed photo whenever you get home to do your editing. RAW files are going to have a higher dynamic range, and in the scenes that you're shooting with the fireworks, where you have extremely bright fireworks that you're trying to make sure don't get overexposed, while at the same time usually needing to bring up the shadows in an underexposed area, the RAW file is only going to help you to be able to get that better photo in your processing. The next feature is the long exposure noise reduction. And this one you're gonna wanna make sure is in the off position. The reason you want this in off relates closely to the reasons you wanna shoot in RAW, is that you don't want the camera to go do any processing to your RAW file just because you're taking a long exposure photo. Now the Nikon Z8 does do a great job with long exposure noise reduction, but I would highly encourage just taking care of that in post-processing and doing the noise reduction that you prefer that gets the image where you want it. Additionally, long exposure noise reduction doubles your time for each photo that you take. So if you're taking a 2-second exposure, you have to allow for 2 seconds for that noise reduction to occur after that. So this will just slow down your photo taking when you're out shooting the fireworks. The next feature that you'll want to have turned on is manual focus mode. So depending on the lens that you're using, it may just have an autofocus or a manual switch. So in that case, you would just switch this on the lens. But for ones that don't have that switch, you're gonna have to go into your camera settings to turn manual focus on. What you'll do with this is you'll make sure ahead of time that you're within focus, and then you can check it whenever the fireworks actually start by looking at your images and adjusting the manual focus as you need to. And this also helps to ensure that you don't accidentally hit your autofocus button and then lose focus on the fireworks and end up with a bunch of blurry photos when you get home. If you're not using an intervalometer or a external shutter release, you'll want to make sure that you've got a delay set whenever you press the shutter release on your camera. The reason you want to do this is to make sure that there's no vibration or shaking that's occurring to the camera when the camera actually starts taking its exposure. If you're using this though, you will have to be aware that as you watch the fireworks, you'll have to get into a rhythm of knowing about when the fireworks are gonna burst so that you can click your shutter release 2 seconds in advance. Now, if you're super close to the fireworks, this can be pretty easy just by listening for the boom whenever the firework gets launched. However, if you're further away, you just have to start cycling through that rhythm, and you'll eventually get into one during the show to know, okay, this is when I need to click the shutter release to capture an image of the firework exploding. So I do have one more feature to go into discussion on, but I'm going to save that one for the end because it's going to relate closely to the exposure that we're going to go over shortly. At this point, if you like this video, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel so you can be the first to see content like this, as well as to help me grow the channel so that I can review more equipment as equipment becomes available. Also, if you like it, please be sure to hit the like button down below. So the key to your photos, though, is going to come down to the camera settings that you choose while you're out in the field. For fireworks photography in particular, you're going to be trying to use a long exposure to get the fireworks to trail, while also using a low ISO to make sure that you don't overexpose the fireworks. On top of that, you have to balance it with the right white balance to ensure that you get the colors that you want in the photo, and also dial in your aperture to also ensure that you don't under or overexpose your image. So looking at white balance, I would suggest starting at a 5000 Kelvin white balance. In reality, this doesn't really matter because if you're following my first feature above that I mentioned and shooting on a RAW file, you can just adjust your white balance in post-processing, but 5000 Kelvin should give you a pretty good starting point. The next camera setting is really the one that you want to hold true to, and that's going to be a 2-second exposure. I found through my shooting that this really produces a nice image. At 2 seconds, you end up capturing one set of fireworks. They fill the frame with their trails, and they don't get a chance to overexpose or capture too many different fireworks going off at once. For a starting point for an aperture, I would recommend somewhere around 5.6. There's really not a lot of rhyme or reason to that, other than depending on your lens, that should keep you from being all the way open without starting to minimize the amount of light coming in. And the final camera setting that you're going to want to set is your ISO. I highly recommend starting this at ISO 100 because, as I mentioned earlier, you want to keep your lowest ISO as you can, because if you start going too high and trying to keep that 2-second exposure to get the pretty trail of the fireworks, you'll overexpose your image. So you want to keep your ISO as low as you can to prevent that from happening. As with the aperture, you may have to adjust this slightly just depending on how dark it is outside or how light it might actually be. Now, if you really want to get fancy, you could go into a shutter priority mode where you'll manually set your shutter to 2 seconds, and then your camera will automatically adjust your aperture, and if you have it set to auto ISO. The only downside to this is going to be if you plan to stack multiple images or you're wanting to create a time lapse of images, you could end up with some slight differences within your exposure, as your camera is likely going to constantly change between different ISOs and different apertures. And there's also no guarantee that going from the constant flashing of the fireworks that you're not going to get some funky images going on as the camera tries to quickly adjust between a dark scene to a bright scene. So getting into that final tip that I really wanted to save to the end, you want to make sure when you go out that you're not just stuck behind the viewfinder. It's really easy to get trapped behind it, and fireworks shows are one of those awesome things that's always great to just sit and watch a bunch of pretty colors explode with the loud noises. So how do you make sure that you're going to go out and shoot the fireworks and actually get to enjoy them while getting a bunch of photos? For that, you'll want to take advantage of the interval timer shooting. So what this is basically the built-in intervalometer on the camera. So this prevents you from having to carry an additional piece of equipment from your tripod or having to go out and purchase an intervalometer. So to use this, you're going to dial in your settings manually first. So if you're ready to set up your interval timer shooting, you'll go into the interval timer shooting setting here. And the first thing that you'll want to set up is choose your start and date time. So this actually might not be something you want to set up in this scenario because you can always just go to the start above where you can activate it manually. Moving down, you have the interval between each shot that the camera is going to try to take. So this is in hours, minutes, and seconds. So we actually want to turn this to a 0. I want to bump this up to a 3. So what this is going to do with a 2-second exposure, this is going to leave 1 second between each time that the camera tries to fire. So you want to make sure that this value is higher so that you leave a gap or a delay and that you can always get to your next photo. So we'll leave that set to 3. We'll move down here to the intervals times the shots divided by the interval. You can actually go in and calculate how much you think you need. I'm just setting this up right now to say that there's going to be 900 intervals that are going to be taken and the number of shots per interval. So we're going to take 1 per interval. So that's going to be 2,700 seconds that this could potentially last for. And you're going to get 900 shots out of that if you let it go all the way. The next setting here is the exposure smoothing. So for this, I'm gonna leave it set to off because I don't want the camera to adjust or compensate for any changes in exposure, because we're gonna have a lot of different flashing going on with the fireworks. So I don't want the camera to do anything funky here. The next item to look at is going to be the interval priority. So this is used for frames that are shot in the P mode or the A mode for the camera. So we're not going to be using that, so we'll leave this turned to off. The next one you also want to leave off is going to be the focus before each shot. You want this turned off because you're going to be in manual mode and you don't want the camera to try to refocus. The next one that you want to look at is your interval timer shooting options. So for AE bracketing, we don't want to do anything with that because there's not going to be any point to bracketing when you're just trying to catch a long exposure. The other one, it's up to you if you want to leave this off. It would be a time-lapse video. So this would have the camera automatically create a time-lapse video at an aspect ratio of 16:9 of all of the images that you're going to capture. However, I prefer to just leave that off because I can create that in my post-processing workflow. And then the last option here is your starting storage folder. So you actually have the option in here to change this to be a new folder or reset your file numbering if you prefer. I usually just leave the sequence out because of the way that I import my photos into Lightroom. It just doesn't make a difference for me. So once you've got all of those settings ready to go ahead and click start here, and my camera screen is going to black out and the camera's actually going to start taking its photos. So if you need to pause it, all you're going to do is wait for the camera to be finished taking a photo, and you're going to click the OK button on the back of it, at which point you can get back into the settings here and you can turn it off, or if you need to, you can also go ahead and restart it. And because you've got this all set up now and running, you're now going to get to sit there, watch the show while your camera does all the work. So maybe other than the first minute or two of the fireworks show where you're just trying to make sure that the camera settings are correct and that you're actually going to get good images, the interval timer shooting is going to do all of the work for you, which then allows you to pull out a lawn chair, sit down, watch and enjoy the fireworks show, and let your camera do all the work for you. At the end of the day, it's always good to work smarter and not harder. So now that you've got all your camera settings ready to go, you know your accessories. The one thing I haven't touched on is a lens to use for this. And for that, I'd highly recommend checking out my video review of the Nikon Z 24-120mm f4 camera lens. This is a fantastic lens for somebody that's going out to take photos of fireworks.